When you practice meditation, you're practicing paying attention. However, to really get the benefit of the practice of meditation, the attention that is being practiced is not a person paying attention. You could say that the first thing to pay attention to is attention, and then the second thing to pay attention to is awareness of attention. The first thing to pay attention to is attention, and then the second thing to pay attention to is awareness of attention. And with the awareness of attention, it's possible to direct attention. It's possible to let attention go and watch it move from one thing to another. And as you do this practice, you notice different aspects of experience. You notice hearing. You notice sensations in the body. You notice seeing if you have your eyes open, or being aware of not seeing. There's thoughts. And the real value of the practice of being aware as awareness of attention, and then noticing what attention is directed to, is to begin to realize, to begin to recognize that that's what's happening. That the truth is that what's happening is awareness of what's happening, and that awareness of what's happening is seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, feeling. And those things are happening. Hearing is hearing. Seeing is seeing. Touching is touching. And as you practice meditation this way, there is a sense of freedom. There is a sense of lightness that begins to occur, because in what I have just shared, there was no you. This is what is important to recognize, because without a you, there's no story. And without a story, there's no person's life. And without a story and without a person's life, there's no wants, there's no preferences, there's no avoidance, there's no grasping. And with those things being absent, what's left is simply life itself. And then this becomes the possibility to experience life itself. To begin, when you're not practicing formal meditation, to be aware of life. As we move through our day as a person, we're not aware of life. We're aware of the life of a person. We're aware of the story that is occurring, in which the person is experiencing what's happening. And along with that comes all of the likes and dislikes, the ups and downs, the suffering, because the narrative that goes along with the story of the person is a narrative in which there's a constant description of what's going on. And as that description is occurring, there is a recognition of the difference between the description and what's actually happening, and they're two different things. And so there's there's this ongoing sense of separation from reality, this ongoing sense of discontentment because of that difference, the difference between what the narrative is and what's actually happening in the world. And this creates conflict. Thought creates conflict. Thought creates conflict, and emotions arise, and suffering occurs. And so when we're practicing meditation, it's possible to pay attention in such a way where you actually notice the truth. You actually notice what's real. And what you notice that's real is awareness and that which is happening. And it's life. You notice life. Life is happening. Life is happening. It's constantly moving. And yet while it's moving, the awareness of its moving is constantly still. And there's a certain kind of beauty to it. There's a certain kind of sense of truth that is inherently fulfilling, that is inherently satisfying. So that as things occur, there's awareness and there's what's happening. There's no should, there's no but, there's no if, there's no comparing it to anything. You become life. Through the practice of meditation, you can experience yourself as life itself. And when you experience yourself as life itself, that which happens is life, and you are life. There is nothing else. This is non-duality. This is why when you hear people speak about non-duality and share a non-dual experience, it sounds like poetry, doesn't it? It sounds like poetry. Because what they're describing is without there being a person. They describe the actual what's happening. The sound of a bird, the sound of, when we were practicing meditation, the sound of footsteps, right? The sound of footsteps. There's a huge difference between the experience of the sound of footsteps and me sitting here trying to meditate and being distracted by footsteps. Do you see the difference? That's a whole difference. Just the sound of footsteps. Just the breath, just breathing, not me breathing, just the sensations that occur. And all of this is happening in the present moment. How long does that take? How long is now? And as it moves, as it changes, you are it moving and changing. You are life. You are it moving and changing. This is the beauty, this is the fulfillment of what meditation can be, by letting go and simply noticing what's real, what's true, what's actually happening. Because when you notice what's real and what's true and what's actually happening, you're naturally noticing the absence of the idea of a person. Because it's not there. It's not there. And this is what's spoken of in terms of these teachings. The recognition and the realization of reality, the recognition and the realization of the truth, and the possibility of living a life as that truth. Now that doesn't mean that there won't be thoughts that occur in the mind of a person. But through these practices, those thoughts that occur in the mind of a person occur and are experienced the same way as everything else is. They're just thoughts. They're just thoughts. They're not the thoughts of a person. They're just thoughts. And so when you're aware of the truth and there's an awareness of just what's so, just thoughts, The thoughts no longer generate the idea that there is a real person. Do you understand the difference? When you see thoughts as just thoughts, thoughts are what typically has generated the idea that there's a person. But when you see thoughts as just thoughts, they no longer generate the idea that there's a person. And so thoughts, the bird singing, footsteps, sensations, it's all the same thing. It's just what's happening. It's life. It's life. And there's no judging about it. There's no wishing it was different. There's no resistance to it because there's no one to resist it. You are it. You are it happening as it's happening. When it begins, you begin. When it ends, you end. There's nothing separate from it to have a problem with it. Do you understand? There's nothing separate from it to have a problem with it. This is true freedom. This is the experience of reality. This is the experience of the self. This is what the teachers teach. This is what the practices are all about. And meditation is an opportunity for you to notice what's real. Really. Simply notice what's real. Notice that there is no one meditating. It's there to see. It's there to see, but in order to see it, you have to recognize that a thought is just a thought. So when the thought occurs, I am hearing footsteps, that doesn't generate an illusion anymore. It's just a thought. It's very satisfying and fulfilling to make direct contact with life. It's very satisfying and fulfilling and beautiful to make direct contact with life, because when you make direct contact with life as life, when you are life connected to life, when you are consciousness being conscious, when you are awareness being aware, the experience of love occurs. The experience of love occurs. And the experience of this unconditional love is simply that there's no resistance to anything. Everything is directly experienced as it is, completely without any resistance to it, without any judgment about it. And so there is no separate narrative going on. There is nothing to figure out. There's nothing to understand. There's nothing to find an answer to. It's all obvious. What's happening is happening, and it's happening the way it's happening. That's what's happening. There is nothing else but that. So what's the problem? There can't be a problem unless there's something separate from that, viewing that, right, with some agenda, right? There can't be a problem unless there's something separate from life, viewing life with an agenda. And that separate thing that views life with an agenda is the illusion that we have of being a person, and that person is trying to survive life. The person is trying to survive life, which is impossible. It's impossible because, first of all, there is no person to survive life, and secondly, it's impossible because there's nothing about life that requires survival. Life is simply a matter of living. It's what's happening. Everything else is a story. You see, when you're free from the story, you can be with things as they are, because that's what's there. There's no story. What's happening is what's happening, and what's not happening is what's not happening. That's the definition of perfection. Things are as they are, and they are not as they're not, and there is nothing else. So, at some point, if you've been listening to this message, you've been listening to these teachings, if you've been practicing meditation, I have to assume that there must be something resonating about this with you. There must be something that you see here like a possibility for an experience of life that is fulfilling, an experience of life where there's freedom, an experience of life where happiness is readily available. And if you see that possibility, if you recognize it, even if you see it in the way that it plays out without a complete, consistent recognition of the truth, you just see the difference it makes when you apply it to the situations you find yourself in. That's enough evidence for you to want the whole enchilada, you see. But the question then becomes, and this is a very important thing to take into consideration, the question then becomes, are you actually committed to this? Right? You have to be committed to this, because if you're not committed to this, the states of mind and the way the thought process works and the conditioning that exists, right, will overrun you. It will overrun you. If you're paying attention and you've been a student of meditation and you've been studying these teachings, you by now should know what I mean when I say it'll overrun you, right? When you have strong emotions, they overrun you. You become lost in the idea you have of yourself as a person. You become lost in the story that's happening at the time that you're experiencing these strong emotions, no matter what they are, right? So there has to come a time when you make a commitment to realizing the truth. There has to come a time when you make an absolute commitment to no longer allow the mind to determine the experience that you're having. An absolute commitment. It takes an absolute commitment. And so I'm challenging you, I'm asking you to look and see where you're at about this. Because it's what it's going to take. The reason why most people don't complete the process, the reason why most people don't actually experience who they are with any degree of consistency, or the truth with any degree of consistency, is because they're holding on, to some, they're reserving some aspect of their commitment. It may appear to be doubt, right? It may appear to be afraid of letting go completely, that if I let go completely, I'll go crazy. I don't know. It manifests itself in a lot of different ways. But you've got to be willing to jump off the cliff. And in this work and in these practices, the cliff is the conditioning. The cliff is the way you have habitually operated, the way you have habitually known what is real and what is true. You've got to be able to let that go. And if you do let it go completely, you'll discover that nothing happens. If you do let it go completely, you'll discover that you're still here, right? And what you let go of is the burden you've been carrying around in your life that's unnecessary. You don't have to carry life on your shoulders. That's what most people are doing. They're carrying life on their shoulders. They're under the burden of the experience of life as a person. So enlightenment is not only that the light is there so that you can see things clearly, but enlightenment is also taking the burden off yourself. Letting yourself be free from the story, letting yourself be free from this burden of being a person who has to cope, who has to survive, who has to figure it out, who has to escape from life, as if that's possible. But really, the thing about it is, it's just like Ramana Maharshi used to say to people when they ask questions, rather than ask a question, ask yourself before you ask the question, who's asking the question? That would be more powerful than answering the question. To ask yourself before you ask the question, who's asking the question? And if you recognize who's asking the question is the problem, right? Because who's asking the question is trying to use understanding. who's asking the question is acting as if there's something to understand, if there's some answer to be had. And that's a never-ending process. That will never end. Questions will generate more questions. So rather than ask questions, you're probably better off just letting yourself be still and be aware. And pay attention and notice the truth. The truth is available at all times. And one of the reasons it's available at all times is because you are the truth. It has to be available at all times because you are the truth. You are what's happening. You are consciousness. You are awareness. You are all there is. You are all there is. That's got to be pretty fulfilling, right? To be the experience of all there is. I really encourage you to not hold back. You know, to really have this life be fulfilled completely by allowing yourself to let go completely and experience what's always readily available, and to trust it. You know, of course, in the beginning, your mind's going to come in. You know, your mind's going to come in, and you will fall into the illusion, the delusion that you've been experiencing all this time. But that doesn't have to be seen as a problem. That's just part of the process, that's all. It's no big deal, it's just part of the process. And if you understand that even when that's the case, that the truth is present, even when that's the case, the truth is present. It's possible to know that you're in the form of a person, but to know that that's what it is. It's just being in the form of a person. It's possible to know that when that's happening, that that's not all there is, and to see through it. It's insubstantial. It's just being generated by thinking. So I can tell you, I don't consider myself to be some kind of extraordinary human being or some special person. And therefore, I can say what I'm saying to you because if I can experience this, then obviously you can experience this. I think anybody who's ever shared these teachings and practices with other people, the authenticity of that sharing was a function of the fact that they saw that who they were sharing with was exactly the same as they were. And that the possibility of experiencing the truth is there for you as equally as it is for me or anybody else. But you have to take it. You have to take the opportunity. You have to recognize that the opportunity does exist and it is real and it is there all the time. But unless you have an absolute conviction about it, you'll end up like most people do, which is, trying. You don't have to try and be what you already are. It seems like, you hit the nail on the head. It seems like you have to keep letting go, right? But what you're doing is just seeing the truth, right? Because there's nobody to let go. So when you're letting go, what are you letting go of, right? If you're letting go, and you're letting go in a way that is going to work, you're letting go of there being someone to let go. You see what I'm saying? If you do that, if you deal with the source of the problem, which is the idea that there's somebody to let go, that will eventually dissolve. Because every time you look at a mirage and you see it's a mirage, it's not what you thought it was. Every time you look at the truth about yourself and you see that you're not who you thought you were, that you're letting go, that the one that's letting go doesn't exist, at some point that will lose its reality. And it'll be less and less the case that that is necessary. That'll just happen naturally. But there must be a commitment to never stop paying attention and seeing what's happening, right? So that you can gradually come out of the dream, gradually come out of the hypnosis. But what you said was true. It seems a certain way. That's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with getting out of how it seems. We're dealing with getting out of how it appears to get to what is actually happening. So that's why I said what I said earlier in terms of you have to have an absolute commitment. You have to wake up in the morning with this as the primary focus of your day, is to pay attention and see things as they are. That's a tall order for most people, right? Because for most people, when they wake up in the morning, the voice in their head starts their day for them, right? So you've got to be able to pay attention to see the voice in your head starting the day for you and recognize that's not real, that's not you. And then you can continue that process throughout the rest of the day. And it'll be an off and on proposition, because as things occur that attract your attention and pull you into the idea of a person, you have to keep catching it again and again, keep catching it, keep catching it. But I can tell you, and there are other people out there who are saying this, that the possibility is a real possibility for this to become a consistent experience, for the tables to turn, and for you to know the truth consistently and have that experience. And that experience is what you really want. It is really what you want. It is happiness. It is freedom. It is peace. It's really what you want.